This is a crusade. This is a holy war against the deep state.
Where are the dictators? Where are the strong men?
Donald Trump is our instrument for retribution.
I'm going to fight for Christians. I'm going to fight for white people.
They have the Great Reset. We have the Great Awakening.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia? Because I am.
I want to see these people go through misery because of their grooming against our children.
After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol.
I did nothing wrong.
Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke.
And I'm Jay McKenzie.
Kelly Weill is a reporter for the Daily Beast who covers issues such as disinformation, extremists, and the extremely online. She's the author of the book Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. Kelly also has her own newsletter, Mom Left, which covers the intersection of parenting and politics. We're thrilled to have her with us today. Kelly, welcome to Did Nothing Wrong. Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, thank you for having me.
We are stoked. This is going to be a lot of fun. So, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, for sure. I am a reporter at the Daily Beast where I cover the far right and its opponents. I'm also the author of Off the Edge. It's a book about flat Earth and other conspiracy theories. And I am the author of a Substack called Mom Left. It's a new newsletter for moms on the left.
Nice. And we've noticed that like a lot of your work gets into conspiracy theories of one sort or another. And how did this become an interest for you?
I'm just really interested in people being wrong on the internet. No, I was honestly, I kind of grew up as a 4chan lurker, right? I always was really interested, not a poster, but definitely a lurker, interested in what people were doing in the weird corners of the internet and frankly, why. And as we moved into the 2016 election cycle, what was just kind of a weird, almost scientific interest for me turned into an unfortunately relevant beat in American politics. So I was able to parlay that into a beat that, God, I wish it became irrelevant, but unfortunately is still very resonant in the discourse today.
Yeah, still, if anything, getting worse, unfortunately. You brought up your book, and the title is Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. So we did have to ask, after writing that, did you come to a conclusion on why people will believe anything?
I think there's a lot of reasons people come to flat Earth and other conspiracy theories. I think one of the most obvious answers is that they're looking for comfort, right? We live in a really confusing, destabilizing era when people are looking for easy answers that just aren't available. Things are complicated. And I think in some ways, conspiracy theories allow for the simplification of a complicated world. It says you don't need to factor in all these elements outside your control, or at the very least, you can assume that somebody else is in control. I think it offers a really consolidated answer and a really comforting narrative for people who want to understand what seems unavailable to them.
Right, definitely. That seems to be where we're at with a lot of society at this point, where things are just way out of control. Most people feel like things are rushing ahead of where they have any reference point for, and grabbing onto something like that, I can definitely see how that would be very comforting to a lot of people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does make me wonder your opinion and perspective in terms of how much do you blame the government, society as a whole, of not helping people enough, not doing enough? And is that directly resulting in more people who go searching?
I think it does, at the very least, indirectly. I think a lot of conspiracy belief can be tied to a lack of feeling of social cohesion. People don't feel like they have security, or they don't feel like they have community. And unfortunately, conspiracy theories suggest an answer to both of those, although I'd argue they're not really satisfying or real answers. When people join a conspiracy movement, they do join a community, and a really vocal one, too. It's a community that says everybody else is wrong, maybe even everybody else is out to get you, but we here in the flat Earth community, or we here in QAnon, we're the ones who really know what's up and we've got your back and you're one of us now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really compelling to a lot of people who are looking for answers, who are looking for identity. And I think, you know, to your point about just sort of security or having some kind of safety net, I think conspiracy theories also gesture at that. I'm thinking of this awful one I wrote about a while ago where people have been foregoing actual medical treatment because they think there's going to be some miracle medical device called the med bed coming out. They're skipping chemo appointments. They're not going to the doctor because they want so desperately to believe that this fountain of youth is going to become available any month now. So I think conspiracy theories do offer community and they offer cope.
So, jumping topics a little bit, let's talk a little about the Cop City issue. We've seen large protests both in Atlanta, Georgia, and around the country about the construction of police training facilities, which have been nicknamed Cop City. Recently, 61 protesters were charged with RICO violations by the Georgia State Attorney General, in which some are calling a massive overreach. You've written extensively about this issue. What can you tell us about how all this started and where it's going?
Oh man. Yeah, this is one of my personal kind of hair on fire topics that I'm glad we're talking about because I feel like it doesn't get quite enough attention.
Right.
Basically, after the George Floyd protests, a lot of cities, despite, you know, kind of mouth sounds about making better police civilian relations, really doubled into investing more money into police, be that, you know, larger police forces, more police infrastructure. In Atlanta, the answer was we're going to build this big police training facility in kind of a forested area. And it would cost something to the tune of $90 million. Now, you can imagine why that would annoy people on a couple fronts. One, you know, it's if you listen to environmental groups around Atlanta, that forest is really quite important in terms of, you know, preventing like a heat island effect, in terms of reducing runoff water that's going to become increasingly an issue as climate change accelerates. People are also pretty appalled at the cost, and people are pretty appalled at the idea that this is the facility where they would be, you know, carrying out SWAT trainings. There would be persistent gunshots coming from this training facility near a disadvantaged community. So there are a lot of reasons folks don't really want this facility. Protests kind of percolated over the past year or so and really escalated this summer. That's when police shot and killed a protester named Tortuguita, who was in a tent in the forest. Police claimed Tortuguita shot at them. There are a lot of autopsies that really cast, I would say, significant doubt on that claim. And as people have become, I think, understandably mobilized around that killing and around that cause, police and prosecutors have only doubled down in the arrests of people on really, really spurious evidence. Like there was a legal music festival near another protest, and they started rounding up people at the music festival saying you had mud on your shoes, so you're probably trespassing. Or, you know, they arrested a National Lawyers Guild legal observer who was there for the explicit purposes and was designated as being someone who was observing these protests, making sure everything was conducted according to standards. And they have charged pretty much everybody they can with RICO violations, including people who are accused of things like running a bail fund or that National Lawyers Guild attorney. And I think people need to understand just how significant a RICO charge is in Georgia. We've heard, ironically, a lot about this because Donald Trump is accused of RICO in Georgia, and people are saying, hey, it's really hard to get pardoned for RICO in Georgia. It's a mandatory minimum of 5 years, after which not the governor, but a specific parole board can theoretically get you off of prison. That's not good.
No.
It's not good if you are a bail fund organizer, or very frankly, anybody who's, you know, worst case, someone did property damage here. And I, you know, maybe shouldn't be stating my views so openly here, but I don't think, you know, what's the worst someone did? Damaged a police car. Okay, there's charges for that, but it's not a racketeering charge for the majority of someone's life. It seems extremely heavy-handed to me.
So that does make me wonder, and as I've been reading these stories, I just remain curious in terms of who's leading this push. Is it police? Does it feel like it's coming from the governor's office? I know some of that can be murky and hard to say, but it almost feels like there is a need on the right politically to find a false equivalence. Well, when you've got all of these charges against Donald Trump, and you've got Proud Boys and Oath Keepers going down for seditious conspiracy charges over January 6th, do you think it's at least possible that some of this is politically driven and rather deliberate attempt to say, oh, well, the left does it too?
I do think there is something to that. I mean, I'm not in anybody's heads here, but the choice to charge these protesters with RICO it's frankly jaw-dropping. It is a really, really weird choice. And other protesters, a lot of the same defendants have been charged with terrorism. For the only evidence, the only charges attached to that terrorism enhancement are things like misdemeanor trespassing. So this is a wild prosecution here. And I don't think you arrive at that without, trying to send a message. And so I do think there is something to the idea that this is messaging to the left. This is saying that, we're not going to tolerate it from you folks either. And I also think even without January 6th having happened, I think this overall Stop Cop City movement is one of the boldest kind of civil resistance movements happening right now. It is a city, and really, I mean, if you look at public comment sections about the Cop City construction, there's really broad opposition to this in Atlanta. It is not just, outside instigators coming in and causing ruckus. There's really broad opposition to this police expansion effort. And I think to lose that battle of opinion would be a blow to state apparatus in Georgia. So I think they have a lot on the line invested in making sure that this kind of dissent doesn't go unpunished.
Even looking at the indictment itself, it's 109 pages, and it seems like this is as much of an attempt to put a philosophy on trial as it is to put people on trial. You've got things like mutual aid being a thing that's apparently criminalized now, and explaining like the idea that if you, like you said, run a bail fund, or if you run some kind of support system for people who have been incarcerated, you are a part of this conspiracy. Like they're taking some of the language in terms of what people from the anarchism scene have managed to talk about, and they've made that criminal, and that's terrifying to a large extent. It's like you're getting dangerously close to prosecuting a belief system here.
It is. It really is. And, I've said it before that I think anarchists are often sort of the canary in the coal mine for civil rights crackdowns, where a lot of people hear anarchists and they say, absolutely, I don't want anything to do with that. It's inherently criminal. Whereas most of the anarchists I know are like, oh no, they're doing food drives, man. Like it's one of the biggest disconnects between public perception and, actual activities I've ever seen. And what this indictment is actually describing, a lot of the overt acts it describes are, really generic acts of solidarity, really commonplace activities on the left, be it mutual aid, be it bail funds, be it showing up for each other. And this indictment is taking those activities, taking these things that I think in many cases are just almost unambiguous moral good, and couching them in the language of anarchism, which, in much of public perception is scary and bad, and saying that, if you run a bail fund, you are complicit in this dark, scary ideology with the black flags. And, I do want to expand on that, because even though I'm sure not everybody listening to this is going to be like, well, okay, anarchism is good now. But I really do think this sets a troubling precedent for other political movements right now. I mean, the idea that running a bail fund makes you complicit in a crime, I would really liken that to efforts to crack down on abortion funds right now. I mean, if you are in a state that criminalizes abortion, if you're in a Texas that allows you to sue anybody who's been involved in an abortion, if you're in an Alabama that's attempting to criminalize travel across state lines for abortion, well, it stands to reason that you could criminalize people running abortion funds. And I see a lot of really troubling groundwork being laid here in this Cop City case.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so scary to a lot of people that have dug into it at all. Hair on fire is a pretty good way to refer to it. The more you start looking into it, the more you're like, this is nuts. They are talking about charging people who are writing letters to incarcerated people. It's wild.
And I did want to say, I agree with you entirely. These are charges against people who are doing unambiguous good, but at the same time, there is a whole host of right-wing influencers who would tell you that these activities are evil, especially if we go back to 2020 and the George Floyd protests. These right-wing influencers would say, oh, you're letting criminals out. Oh, you want to give people a pass. Oh, they're burning down our cities, and how dare you allow this to happen and then free these people. And they've created such an echo chamber that it sort of feels like the people who wrote this indictment, maybe you're reading those tweets or at least agree with that sentiment.
That's a great point.
It is interesting. You do see a lot of very inflammatory language in this indictment, just the idea of mutual aid being this shadowy communist ideology instead of just, something people have done throughout all of history, right? And there is kind of a bail funds for me, but not for the sort of element of this, right? Where you've got Trump supporting bail funds for January 6th defendants. So it's always a very hypocritical accusation. And yet, I definitely do think you're right that that this just sort of public opinion campaign against the left and against really innocuous left organizing has definitely been running since at least 2020.
Wow. Yeah. So speaking of people who popped up in kind of strange places in 2020, I remember seeing the Drake meme of, liking this, not liking that pop up with Ammon Bundy's face photoshopped into it, liking Black Lives Matter, not liking Bureau of Land Management. He's been in the news again recently, and you've covered him and his various legal issues quite extensively. So for those of us who are possibly unfamiliar with him, those of us who, didn't grow up in the Eastern Washington, like me, and maybe haven't kept up with him since he was one of the leaders of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge standoff in 2016. Who is this guy? What has he been up to? And why is he relevant to the conversation in 2023 and beyond?
Sure. So Ammon Bundy, he's part of the Bundy clan. His family was involved, primarily his father, Cliven Bundy, in a standoff with federal agents, I believe 2014. And then Ammon himself led his own armed standoff in 2016. These are basically activists against the idea of public lands, and more specifically, they're activists in the idea that their cows should be able to graze on public lands for free. So they're radical privatization activists, really. Out of that movement, out of this idea that there shouldn't be publicly funded lands or resources, has come this group called the People's Rights Network. It's Bundy's mobilization network. It's this kind of loosely affiliated organization that can mobilize to protest, say, a mask mandate somewhere, or a vaccine clinic, or a hospital at very short notice. And in March 2022, I think, again, you might want to fact check me on specific dates, but there was a People's Rights member whose grandson was briefly treated in a hospital for malnutrition against the parents' will. This was a child protective services case. This is where, state agencies said, hey, this is kind of an emergency. We need to get this kid on fluids. Kid was returned to the parents and appears to be healthy now. However, Bundy is a very good spokesperson for himself. He does know how to latch onto what is a somewhat sympathetic cause and turn it from something that has, I think, populist appeal into something that is very keenly right-wing and very pointedly conservative. So he took this, I think, sympathetic case of, oh no, what's going to happen to this child who's removed from his parents, even though, again, it was a CPS case, needed hospital treatment. And Ammon Bundy decided to accuse the hospital of child trafficking. He held protests in the hospital parking lot. He shut down an ambulance bay, causing ambulances to be rerouted. He basically derailed hospital staff's lives, implying that they were part of like a QAnon ring, that they were abducting kids and trafficking them. He said in court that the hospital was stealing Christian children to give to gay couples for sexual abuse, which I think really gives away his whole game. And recently he has completely lost that case, didn't even show up to fight it. And so the hospital is now saying, okay, how do we collect on the many millions of dollars that you now owe us in damages?
Yeah, and they're having a hard time nailing this guy down. He's claiming he's broke. He's claiming he has no money, when in reality, it's starting to look like he definitely has a little more than that stashed away here and there. And the scary part is that guy's got a following out in the West. He's got at least enough people to show up that he can have them show up anytime it looks like there's going to be a standoff or a demonstration. And that seems to be the guy's end game, is forcing the idea of a confrontation again with law enforcement. This is what he's sort of been doing ever since 2016. And he definitely seems to have a talent for it.
Well, and when you mention child trafficking and Christian children, and it seems like he's almost got a collection of buzzwords that he knows will mobilize an unknown, but some number of people. If you tell certain people, especially on the right, that there's child trafficking, well, maybe if they're a QAnon follower, they'll show up. Or if you say it's Christian children, then, well, certain people will show up for that to defend their religion, or children who are white, perhaps. They might go into it with that assumption. But it is fascinating, and it does show his skill as a propagandist.
Yeah, I think a skilled propagandist is a good way to describe him. I would say optimistically that I've seen fewer people rally to his cause over the duration of this court case, where he's sort of, he's really been a coward. He hasn't showed up in court. I don't think that plays well with his base. But I mean, issues like child trafficking, even though Ammon Bundy is probably going to draw the most extreme fringe of people to show up, armed to defend his house or whatever the hell. Movies like Sound of Freedom this summer, the anti-trafficking film, yes, that really does show that there is a kind of a latent base of ambiently right-wing people who are so moved to mobilize around these causes. And so I think maybe it's only a function of him not handling this court case well, maybe having overstepped what he's capable of, that this isn't more of a pressing threat.
Yeah. He's definitely an individual that a little bit frightening, but he's always been kind of very self-interested looking in from the outside. So be interesting to see where that goes going forward.
So we also wanted to ask you about this, because in addition to your work at the Daily Beast, you've recently started a Substack, which I don't know how you write this much, but you managed to do it. And your Substack is called Mom Left. And we were curious to ask how you ended up getting started with this.
I think part of the kernel of this was having had my first child in January 2020, which was just an unbelievably radicalizing experience in the ways that support networks and care were just cut off. And so it's a project that's kind of been simmering in my mind for a while, but I do cover the right, and I'm very interested in the right's ideas of motherhood, especially as they've been weaponized over the past election cycle with groups like Moms for Liberty, with attacks on schools and libraries and LGBTQ youth being one of the kind of attack points of the right. And when I was looking for resources on the left that were intended to combat this, I didn't find too much. And I thought there was probably a place to write something oppositional about this, not just writing about, why you shouldn't be a trad wife and why this is a scam, but to write something kind of affirmative about being a mother on the left. And so it's been going for about a month now. It's been a whole host of fun. And yeah, it's good. I'm riffing. It's something I've wanted to do for a bit.
Oh, that's great. But it did make me think, after reading a couple of your articles, that if you look at a group like Moms for Liberty, I can't think of a left-wing equivalent. And it does feel like there's a space there for this content, for this perspective, which I think is great that you're filling.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it was kind of striking the absence of that. There's some cynical reasons. I think, groups like Moms for Liberty are very likely to get donor money on the right that just doesn't exist on the left. I think there is, certainly a support right-wing blogosphere that is just eager for any women to step up and affirm what is a very patriarchal right-wing vision of the world. And so, I don't think there's any there's no money in doing this for the left, but when is there ever?
There's a lot of things on the left that there's just no money in doing, even though we really could use more people doing it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so, it's listen, I love to be online. It's my burden, but that's where I'm at. I like to write, and I wanted to see if I could start a bit of a conversation about this. So it's been cool seeing the feedback the first few weeks.
Nice. One of the articles you wrote recently for Mom Left was about school lunch debt and how it's skyrocketed with the expiration of the supports that were in place during the pandemic. And we know that feeding kids absolutely leads to measurably better outcomes, both in school and in life. Is there any other justification for some of these humiliating tactics that you outline that schools are using on students that are behind on their school lunch debt, besides just being cruel?
I I know it's a cliche to say the cruelty is the point, but often I do think it's sort of that. There is. I got feedback from somebody who said they lived in a kind of purple state that had been discussing on talk radio about whether to keep providing free lunches. And the call-in commenters, as is often the case on talk radio, were just ragging on these kids, saying, well, we don't provide free housing for kids. And to that, my answer is, well, you should. I think there is a real I got mine attitude in this country. And so I think some people are inherently hostile to the idea that we should be providing just, public goods for each other, especially something like free lunches. I mean, that costs pennies. It really does. I also do think debt is a good vehicle for control. And I'm not saying that in a conspiracy way. There's no great cabal saying, we're going to get into everyone's homes and control their finances. But I think debt is humiliating, and it's a real just sledgehammer to people's lives. And the way that school debt can depress a child's confidence in their will and keep parents on the run, and just really keep a family frightened and insecure. I do think that dovetails pretty nicely with Republican programs that don't want people to have, leisure, don't want people to have the economic wherewithal to make their own decisions, to feel just a little bit more comfortable. And so I think even though school lunch debt is not, numerically anywhere near student debt or credit card debt, I think it's one of the most emotionally pointed debts that people can experience.
Well, and especially with the tactics that they're using of making it clear to all the other kids in the situation that, hey, this kid can't afford lunch. You're basically singling these kids out as the others in that way and humiliating them even farther. This has got to be terribly negative for the psyche going forwards. There's no way that this doesn't affect you on some huge level.
Well, and as someone who has worked with kids, and I'm in Tennessee, and I can only speak for the sentiment here, but it does seem to be a prevailing thought, at least with adults, that this is not about whether or not kids eat. It's the parents. The parents just don't want to pay. Of course they could pay. They just don't want to. But I wish more people would stop and think about it and realize that a lot of these kids, most, if not all of these kids, if they don't eat at school, they don't eat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you really care about getting basic nutrition to kids, you cannot devise a better program than a school lunch where you buy food in bulk and distribute it evenly. There's just absolutely no argument against it. And the idea that, well, the parents don't want to pay. I mean, we see this weaponized against so many public programs. We see it weaponized against even the idea of public schools, right? I mean, I've brought up schooling and people say, oh, you mean the government daycares for K through 12? It's like, well, what's wrong with that? So I think there is a real hostility toward the idea of giving things to families. And people put kids on the front line of that, and I just think it's indefensible.
Yeah.
Right, as if feeding kids is somehow full communism. And for some people, though, it is. And that is something that essentially they believe. But I do love your articles, and you bring together your opinion on your Substack along with a lot of facts. But it was interesting to me. I didn't realize how unpopular a lot of these right-wing ideas about education are, because the right is really good at making it seem like they're a lot more popular than they are. There's a lot more local and a kind of groundswell of support for their issues, but the data does not reflect that.
No, absolutely not. One of the first articles I wrote for my Mom Left Substack was titled, "They're Not With Us," because they're not. And I think this is the whole premise underlying something like Moms for Liberty. You have a very loud minority flooding institutions that don't usually see a lot of conflict. School board meetings, very local elections, even just, person-to-person conversations within the community. And they are just flooding the zone with this right-wing messaging, really emotionally charged stuff. In some cases implying that, oppositional teachers and administrators are pedophiles, that sort of thing, just abhorrent. And I think this hijacks a lot of discourse in a way that people aren't used to. People don't really want that level of conflict. People aren't going to school board meetings with the stated intention of brawling. So they've been able to step into this void pretty well. And, I think it sort of taps into an antisocial nature of the right. Most people would be put off by that idea. I certainly am not conflict averse, and I don't want to go argue at my school board meeting. But these are people who have a very different conception of the public and who don't really seem to mind getting in there and making things just a little bit more uncomfortable than everybody else is inclined to.
So one of the groups that has been really prominent in getting into the school boards and basically going in and yelling at people in that context has been Moms for Liberty. And they have been a part of the nationwide Republican push to target school boards and ban so-called woke books from across the country. And they've been getting a lot of support from mainstream Republicans on this. So do you think a group like this is going to continue to grow in prominence? And if so, to what end?
Yeah, I do, unfortunately. I mean, at the Moms for Liberty Summit, this summer, they had all the Republican heavy hitters. Trump was there, DeSantis was there, and that was an era when DeSantis wasn't completely, single digit polling in the presidential race. And so I think the Republican Party does see that that is the way the winds are blowing. I think maybe one reason for that is children and the idea of we've got to protect the kids is maybe one of the only or most appealing ways Republicans can pitch a deeply unpopular social message. This idea that it's not okay to be gay, that, trans people are not only invalid, but, I can't even come up with the euphemistic way to summarize what they think about trans people. The idea that Black history is a hoax, it's got to be stamped out. And these are all messages that the right was pretty unsuccessful at pushing before this kind of messaging. They were, losing horribly on the Black Lives Matter front. Gay marriage is overwhelmingly popular, but when people put this into the context of we've got to protect the kids from sexualization, which just, means the existence of queer people, suddenly you get a lot more sympathy, I think, for those reasons that we were talking about before, where people do believe that, kids are being trafficked, that we've got to protect this innocence that is, supposedly always under threat. So I think, unfortunately, they are onto something.
Hmm. Well, one of the things that we've noticed just based on the people we've talked to and what we've been researching is that it seems like there is a younger generation of Republicans coming up that are incredibly right-wing. Their heroes aren't people like William Buckley. They're people like Nick Fuentes. And you wrote about a former DeSantis staffer, guy by the name of Nate Hotchman, who they fired after he was found to have shared and been involved in the creation of some pro-DeSantis videos that were, put it bluntly, just overly fascist. Do you see this guy as a unique case, or do you see what we're seeing with the almost fascist beliefs being way more prominent amongst the younger set of Gen Z Republicans?
I am seeing exactly what you're seeing, and it is wild to me because, these days, a lot of kind of, red state representatives' offices, or maybe, the Republican Party of Texas, if you call into their shop, you might get one of these Zoomer fascists, let's just say. And I think they often skate because they know how to hide the exact tone of their sympathies. But I mean, you're talking to one of these guys, and there's I'm a fairly young person, right? I'm 29, and there's a real moment where it's like, I see you, you see me, and you're going to say something like Deus Vult when you hang up the phone. It's like, come on, dude, you're not, as you said, a National Review Republican, although I guess Nate Hotchman did write for them. I mean, these guys are getting their political instruction from Fortune. They're getting their political instruction from Nick Fuentes. And, to that end, I think those are some of the only Republican institutions really making interesting outreach to young people.
No, I think you're right. They're good at appearing normal. They don't necessarily look like they're white supremacist or that they hold some far-right beliefs. But they're out there, and right now they're essentially in their 20s, but in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, these are going to be the people that are running for office and making policy decisions. And we don't have a good answer on what to do about that. You can't force people to change their opinions, but it does cast a shadow over the future. And I don't know if you see a way to even reach these people, or it does seem like a case of almost just terminally online, and they've become this.
Yeah, I think it's a real problem, and I wish I had a good solution to suggest. But unfortunately, I think at least polling suggests that Gen Z is quite liberal, right? That's young generations usually are, but it does seem like a broad trend with them. I think most Zoomers who choose to be Republican, at least to the extent that they're like, making a career in Republican politics, there's a lot of negative polarization there. They're not just going to their liberal college campus and be like, hey, I might agree with you and I might disagree with you on some fiscal policy. There's a lot of identity formation and being opposed to liberals. And so that's where I think they start really mainlining the hardcore white supremacist stuff, the real misogynist stuff, the legislating by 4chan type deal. And so I don't know how you talk someone out of that when it's so baked into their identities, be it political, personal, and with some of these guys professional as they start making their way through the GOP.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw it yesterday, but the National Republican, the NRCC Twitter account yesterday tweeted out a fake 4chan green text. And that about Jamal Bowman and the fire alarm issue. And that to me was just so indicative of the mindset of whoever's running that social media account for them. Like, this is what you think is going to hit. Why do you think this is going to hit? Who are you? I mean, I tweeted it at the time, $5 says the person's running this account as a groiper. But it's definitely like, if you think that's going to resonate with your audience, you need to go outside and touch grass at this point. You are just
absolutely, because who recognizes that genuinely? Like, I'd love to see crosstabs. Who recognizes 4chan green text? It's internet poison people like us and a small selection of youngish internet users who aren't even QAnon people anymore. Those people went to 8chan and then bounced. So, like, what are you trying to signal here? What is this approving of? And I just think it's, fortunately, nobody looks at Twitter anymore either, but it was a very telling post.
Yeah.
It does make me wonder, and I'm sure it's something you've considered and looked at. These extreme beliefs remain unpopular. It's like their ideas about children's education. It remains unpopular, but if anything, it continues to get more and more extreme with Gen Z or certain, at least MAGA Republicans. And you do have to wonder, is there an end goal here, or are they just following the content and it takes them where it takes them?
I think a lot of these people are completely disinterested in, democratic rule. They don't care that these are unpopular programs. Jason Wilson at The Guardian just had a great piece yesterday about the Caesar reverence. Right. These people want to be monarchs. They want to be weird little princelings. They want to have their fiefdoms, and they, dream of kind of techno-utopian feudalism. Like, it's weird stuff that these guys are reading. You engage with any of the quote unquote right intellectuals right now, you are going straight down to like Peter Thiel, singularity, techno slavery. Like, it's weird stuff. I'm not exaggerating by too much there.
No, not at all.
And so I don't think that these folks really care about building consensus. They care about building power. And that's something that we're going to increasingly see in just openly anti-democratic actions by the right. Thinking about Texas refusing to impeach its attorney general recently. I mean, these things are blatant, and they're saying, well, what are you going to do about it?
Well, and I just actually read that piece this morning by Jason Wilson, and I found myself thinking that I think he kind of nailed it when he said that the idea that these people have come to the conclusion that they may not win another Democratic election. So more extreme measures need to be taken. And you're starting to see that, coming out of Claremont, which is, the big think tank down there. People are starting to say, well, time to, take off the gloves, cross the Rubicon, whatever the phrase we're using this week for it is. And we've got a real huge problem with that's the level that you're starting to have to play to on that side. There's no center here anymore, not in the same sense.
Well, and explaining it to people as it gets more and more extreme and weird, has to become more and more difficult. And people, it almost is like the crazier it gets, the more of a shield they put up, because I think a lot of people who don't get this stuff assume you're exaggerating, or that's overblown. And they don't realize how real this is for these people.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. I mean, 4 years of a Trump administration, I think, inoculated people to all kinds of crazy. I was just saying yesterday, you were mentioning the Bowman thing, Jamal Bowman. He's accused of maybe pulling a fire alarm. It's ambiguous. It had something to do with an emergency exit door. Okay, whatever. But this discourse and the layers of this discourse and this analyzing it are coming simultaneously to both Representative Paul Gosar and Donald Trump, suggesting that we kill General Mark Milley. Paul Gosar suggested that Milley be hanged for, I think it was, quote, promoting sodomy. I mean, that is nuts. That is fascist. That's the call for killing someone. That is just so beyond the pale of what's allowable anywhere on the left. And that we kind of say, well, you know, that's Paul again, wacky old dentist doing his thing. And we have, we're on day 5 of did Jamal Bowman pull the fire alarm discourse. It's just, the incentives and the scrutiny are just so off center that I'm not really sure, how we readjust.
That's a great question.
Yeah. And there are certain groups within the mainstream media that will put Jamal Bowman pulling the fire alarm, which, okay, dumb thing to do, but they'll put that on the front page instead of, Paul Gosar or what Trump has threatened this week. And okay, you don't just want to repeat everything verbatim and give them this platform, but also we have to talk about it. And why aren't we talking about the fact that Kevin McCarthy has done nothing to Gosar? He hasn't condemned it. He hasn't taken him off committees. It's just, like you said, that's Paul.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the problem is Paul Gosar was elected and his constituents have looked at that and said, well, okay, that's nice. I mean, we've just kind of accepted that that's the way it is and that's what's accepted for this kind of politician. And I think we need to continually reinforce how weird that is, how violent that is.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things, and you used to do this podcast that we were big fans of and now is unfortunately not around anymore. We get asked all the time, what happened to Fever Dreams? Fever Dreams was great. That was my favorite podcast. And you guys filled a real hole in the discourse that I don't think has necessarily been, filled yet. So what are you planning on doing about that? Do you have any future plans to put something else together?
Do any podcast producers want to give me $1 million? No, I'm joking. I don't really know. I mean, this was me and Will Summers podcast at the Daily Beast. Will's at the Washington Post now, doing great things. It's always an open question. I write about this stuff, at the Daily Beast. I kind of write about its inverse left stuff on my Substack. I mean, hey, listen, it's that's media, baby. It's rough. Miss the pod, miss our listeners, but hopefully folks are still reading.
Definitely seems like they are. Definitely, because we still hear it. People are just like, oh, that was so great.
Yeah. Well, and it's clear that you've been doing this a while, because we know we've got a real pro on the pod. When it's like, I'm sitting here thinking, we're not going to have to edit anything.
Yeah,
because you
this can be easy.
You've got this down.
I am so much better behaved in this pod than the other one, where I would stop every 5 minutes to be like, Jesse, can you redo that for me? I'm gonna go get some water. So we're rolling here. This is good.
That's great.
Well, how can people support your work? What can people do to support you and the work that you're doing?
I mean, reading is great. I have, like I said, now I'm going to make you edit. I've got a new Substack.
Sorry, I ruined it.
I've got a new Substack. It's called Mom Left. It's momleft.substack.com. I recently bought the domain name, so it might just be Mom Left soon. But, I'm trying to get that off the ground. So readers super appreciated there. The conversation's super appreciated there. I'm really interested in what folks have to say about this topic, because I think it is a little under-discussed for the amount of support that's there. And I have a book out. It's called Off the Edge, Flat Earthers, Conspiracy Culture, and Why People Will Believe Anything. And that's bookstores and online.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, the newsletter is great. When we were prepping for this, I dove into that, and it's amazing how much, number one, how much writing you did and how much you continue to do, like Jay said earlier. And the topic, like you said, is a very kind of criminally under-discussed subject. So you definitely go out and subscribe to that. Mom Left, the Substack. It's phenomenal. Kelly, thank you so much for being on with us today. We had a great time, learned a lot talking about some of this stuff, and we have to do this again sometime. You were great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks. This was great.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can find us on the web at didnothingwrongpod.com. Please make sure you subscribe to get our content straight into your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at James, the word 4, and the letter M, all one word, and GRZABJJ, GRZABJJ, as well as DNW Pod. We're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that allow us to keep doing this important work. Thanks, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.